sister and brother. There is love in this family. Pick yourself up and get on your feet. Don't stop me now, Maui styling, don't let me down. 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 Makena styling, up country styling, Campo styling, Kahanapali styling, Hana styling, Wai'ehu styling, Bahia styling, Keanai styling, Maui styling, don't let me down. 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 Maui styling, Maui styling, don't stop me now. Maui styling.
Aloha! Welcome to another Dream Makers. Mama presents. You know, Mama, the Maui Arts and Music Association, has seen this beautiful face one more time before. This is Dr. Nick Begich. Welcome again to our show.
Good to be here with you, Jason.
You know, we were sitting and trying to think, okay, when was Nick with us? And what did we discover it was?
I think it was 1996, actually.
1996, so that's 7 years ago.
Right.
6.5, 7 years ago. Dr. Begich is a doctor of
It's traditional medicine and complementary medicines.
traditional medicine and complementary medicine, but many of you know him because you wrote a book called Angels Don't Play This HAARP, and HAARP was H-A-A-R-P, which was, let me see how I'll test myself.
Okay.
It's one of our more popular shows, actually. High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program,
You got it.
which is, I'll let him tell you in a second, but the military beaming low-frequency beams off the ionosphere to change weather patterns and affect people in military applications, etc.
Right.
And a lot's happened. We should probably start there and let you kind of bring us
Sure. A good deal has happened since that time. You know, originally the whole HAARP project was brought first to the attention of the public through radio, through communications like this, forums like this, and eventually it took us into the European Parliament. It took us into Europe. Actually, 10 times in the last 7 years we've been over to Europe working on this project. And our intention was, if we could create a strong political movement on the European side and the U.S. side, working with parliamentarians in Europe, working with the public in the U.S., we might eventually see this issue debated within our own Congress. That has not yet happened, at least not in the way that we had intended for it to take place.
Let me stop for a quick second, because for those of you that didn't see the show, this was a big deal. The military got funded. I think we call it a black box project. That means that the government puts money into different projects that they know very little about. And this was a big star of that.
Absolutely. In fact, when you look at what it really was, during the Clinton administration, early administration, he opposed, for instance, Star Wars missile defense.
Yeah.
Yet this project as a research project was moving forward. And it, in fact, formed the corpus of a ground-based missile defense system. We had suggested as far back as 1996 that it would eventually lead to the abandonment of the ABM treaty, which happened in the last year or so, with a lot of objection from people all over the world.
You guys know what ABM is? It's not a bowel movement.
It's the anti-ballistic missile treaty.
Anti-ballistic missile treaty.
Now,
see? So catch this. Here's a gentleman in Alaska who was writing about something that was happening in your backyard.
Right.
And your family had a history of being, I want to say activists, maybe socially aware and doing something about it.
Yeah, and activist. I mean, my father was in the United States Congress. My mother was National Committee woman for the Democratic Party a couple of terms, ran for public office a number of times. My brothers have been politically active on the Anchorage Assembly and in local and state politics. And myself, my interest has been tribal governments, Alaska state politics, and international affairs.
And you're a medical doctor.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, you know, you come with qualification. I don't know how much traditional medicine you practice, but carrying that moniker as doctor, I'm sure has been a real good calling card, that you've been accepted and people are listening to you with a lot more care and than otherwise. You use
Absolutely.
a certain protocol and style where you document and dot your I's
Absolutely.
and cross your T's.
You know, and this is, I think, an important part and perhaps hallmark of our work, is we don't just do it for the academics. Everything that we write, we footnote, so that whenever we make a statement, you can see clearly where it came from, you can understand where it came from, you can make your own interpretations of the original documents, and we think that is a critical element. In fact, that is what has taken these issues into the parliaments of Europe successfully. The idea of what HAARP could do, and just to kind of tick through those quickly. The first issue was communication with submarines, and one of the ways that they envisioned this happening was by creating a pulsed signal that would move up into this upper area above the Earth called the ionosphere, which begins about 30 miles above the Earth's surface. And by sending energy in a very specific way, they can create sort of a resonance effect, an effect where this layer begins to pulse in harmony with the signal on the ground, sending back a signal through the earth and sea in the form of a very long wave of energy. That penetrates the earth and sea, which allows for the communication of submarines. It also allows for something called earth-penetrating tomography, which we'll get to in maybe just a minute. But the communication with submarines in the past and even presently was done with very long antennas, 14 to 26 mile long antennas buried on the Aleutian chain in the central part of the United States, Michigan, Wisconsin area. Created quite a bit of controversy. Many will remember back in the 70s when those systems were being installed. But the point is, this uses part of the natural environment, the ionosphere, converts it as if it were a component on a machine to create this returning signal, artificially stimulating it, in other words. What then happens, that signal moves to the earth and sea. A certain amount of that signal bounces back. By analyzing the reflected signal, you can determine what's under the surface of the ground. In fact, in November 27th, of 2001, we had a report by MSNBC on the Gulf situation in Afghanistan, and they suggested that this technology be used for locating tunnels, for instance, in Afghanistan, for trying to ferret out terrorists in conjunction with other seismic sensors and other technologies that are available now. What happened with HAARP is they continued to develop the prototype, which is where this all started, part of a university project controlled by the Navy and the Air Force, eventually moving almost completely to military control, with a little sidelight from the academics when they needed additional conceptual research. But going beyond the earth-penetrating tomography and communications, the other thing that came up, very important issue in communications, is if the ionosphere is disturbed by natural phenomena like radiation from the sun, solar flares, and the like, communications can be disrupted. All forms of communication, forms of wireless communication, can be disrupted by activity in the ionosphere in terms of how that character changes. If you can artificially change its character, what you can do is deny your adversaries the ability to communicate, while at the same time carrying your communications on the very same signals. So it becomes pretty interesting from a military perspective for that reason. Other uses of the technology, if you use HAARP in conjunction with additional transmitters, you can create what's called a plasma mirror, and it would be visualized as a layer of energy projected out into the upper atmosphere, so that that layer of energy, when other energy hits it, it bounces like light off of a mirror. And what happens then is you get this over-the-horizon ability, where you can bounce the signal over the horizon, and they can use it for over-the-horizon radar, which is an interesting concept. In fact, in HAARP, The beauty of the system from a military perspective is it works both at a very far distance and at very close ranges, from very high elevations where you would get intercontinental ballistic missiles, for instance, to very low elevations where you might pick up things like cruise missiles. So here you have a technology that can literally look around the horizon at anything coming in to the continental United States, as an example. But bear in mind, situating a system like this in Alaska under the ABM Treaty, the Anti-Ballistics Missile Treaty, was forbidden until that treaty was abandoned in the last year. Yet we were moving forward with it during the early years of the Clinton administration, as well as at the end, where there was a lot more energy in missile defense, both from his administration, of course, with the new Bush administration. That is the case. Looking over the horizon was just one aspect. In addition to that, you would create an energy field around those incoming objects, which with gamma ray detectors mounted on satellites, you can actually detect which of those objects might carry nuclear payloads. Obviously something very important from a military perspective. In fact, if you've heard the recent criticisms of missile defense in the last few months here in late 2000, early 2003, what you see is this debate from scientists saying, hey, this will never work because we'll never be able to sort out which are the real targets and which aren't. Those scientists haven't done their research. The research that we did in 1993 and 95 showed clearly that this technology existed with HAARP, and we actually cite the patents that show the development of that technology. So in terms of looking over the horizon would be the first aspect. The second aspect would be discriminating or sorting out the targets, which ones are the real threats, which ones aren't. And then the last aspect, which is really interesting, is that this system, if energized with enough power, can create what's called an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. This is a surge of energy sufficient to disrupt the onboard computers or the avionics, the things that control the flight path of the object, causing it to malfunction and crash. So you can detect, discriminate or sort out, and then destroy the object, all with the same system. Now those are the straight-up military applications. The ones that were funded on a priority basis in 1996 was earth-penetrating tomography, primarily because of the aftermath of the Gulf War and wanting to locate underground facilities, just like we're doing today.
How did you come upon this kind of information?
Well, you know, it's the compilation of a lot of research. I mean, if in the case of the HAARP story, over 400 source documents were compiled, most of them in the open literature. And the way that we did that work is you first look at what's openly disclosed within the military project itself. The next thing you do is you start looking at the companies, the patent records surrounding those companies. You start looking at the names that show up in the literature and see what else they've written and how else that ties in. And then you start looking at the academic research, see how that looks, and then you look at the companies themselves, their stockholder reports, which reveal quite a bit. It's really like the unraveling of a thread, and at the end, you get a pretty good mosaic.
And then you ask them.
And then you start asking questions. Okay. And that's where a lot gets flushed out, because once you have a good basis for knowledge, then you can start to ask the kind of questions that draw out the things that you really need to know. The two areas that became the most disconcerting for us were the idea of weather modification technologies and what that entails with HAARP. And weather modification goes back a long time. In fact, environmental manipulation as a concept in war goes back to the early 70s, even further back into the 60s. By the mid-1970s, the United States and over 60 other countries had signed on to an international treaty where we agreed to not use weather modification or geophysical manipulation of the Earth itself as a weapon of war. The important thing to remember is, now that's now 26 years ago. Now, very few people recognize that the state of the technology that was of such concern, greater concern than the chemical and biological treaties of just a few years ago or some of the nuclear disarmament treaties that followed. But those areas were so disconcerting in what we had found and the Russians had found, who were the instigators of that treaty dialogue, that a great deal had to be done. And what was suggested in the 70s, many will remember there was the woodpecker signal. And this was this signal that was appearing for ham operators. And what it was this kind of pecking sound. And they triangulated it and found that these signals were coming out of the former Soviet Union from a number of transmitters. These very same transmitters, the HAARP scientists, point to as the predecessors of the very system developed in central Alaska and existing there today. Now, what happened since then is, and interestingly enough, on August 9th of 2002, for the first time, Russian scientists moved forward. They took it into the Duma, which is equivalent to their Congress or their parliament, and actually moved the issue forward to Putin, opposing HAARP specifically because of its potential impacts on weather, human health, and environmental systems, not to mention the straight-up military concerns that they obviously have. That was a significant breakthrough in terms of this work, and one of the speakers and presenters of that issue was someone that we had presented to a number of years before in Brussels with a group called Globe, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit later.
Well, we'll talk about it as we're going here. You know, what we're talking about is what Nick was here sharing in 1996, which was already in process, this HAARP project. So from that, we're going to talk about, you went to Europe and lots of things came out of that. That's a lot of years ago. I know that's like ancient history you're talking about here.
You know, and it's gone by pretty quickly, Jason, I got to tell you. I mean,
you've written a couple more books, and you've brought up other subjects, I would say, as dramatic, and maybe you'll say even more dramatic.
Perhaps so. Yeah, perhaps more. You know, the thing that happened early on is, first of all, we never intended to be in this work. I mean, our intention was to take issues, connect scientists together, find a way to bring those issues into the public, and then HAARP found me, because we weren't looking for this subject. And what became clear was that this issue was so important that it really deserved public attention. So I wrote an article with the encouragement of friends, thinking, okay, this will be a good thing to do, this will at least get the story out, but I never visualized myself as a writer, just a speaker. And I thought, well, okay, this will be good. So we got the first story out. It led me to a person, Gene Manning, who became my co-author on Angels Don't Play This HAARP. That led to a whole chain of events. One of those events was an opportunity to speak on a show that most people here in the islands hear, like we do in the mainland, Art Bell's program. Well, someone who heard me on that show knew someone in the European Parliament, took a copy of our work, sent it over, that individual read it, he began asking European scientists about the validity of our ideas, and then he called me on the phone and said, look, I'd like to meet you, when are you going to be in Europe? We made arrangements at that point to go. In fact, that call came when I was here, as now that I recall. It was while I was sitting in a condominium across the yard here, we got that first
Maui.
call.
See?
And it was a gentleman by the name of Tom Spencer. And Tom was pretty progressive. When he was making his inquiries, one of the things he ran into continually from the British military was, Parliamentarian Spencer, stay out of this issue. This is not an issue that you need to be involved with. And for him, that was the ticket to the dance. I mean, for him, it was the encouragement to engage the issue, and he did. In fact, he was able to arrange after our first visit, and he was a conservative. Think about this. He's a conservative member of the European Parliament. Interestingly enough, at the time he was chairing their environmental subcommittee. When we went over to see him, he had just gotten into appointment, and it was to the Foreign Affairs Committee chairmanship. So he was now in a position of really doing something with this issue in the European community, in a setting where he was recognized as an environmental activist, as a conservative, at the same time recognized as someone who did support the military in most cases. In this case, he found strong opposition in his own heart for what this entailed for the whole planet. The thing that happened in that is he connected us to Social Democrats and Greens, and we were able to see a coalition forged in the European Parliament. When you form a coalition there with the Conservatives, the Greens, and the Social Democrats, it's like having the Republicans and Democrats shaking hands in the United States. Things can happen, and they did. He brought us over on another occasion to meet with a group called Globe, and this was a group of 200 nationally elected legislators from 44 governments, not just in Europe, but from around the world. These are the leading environmental legislators on the planet, and we had an opportunity to present in that conference on this subject.
You had mentioned about them that there's some restriction on who could even be part of GLOBE, right?
Absolutely. You have to be a nationally elected legislator to be a part of that organization.
So you coming over and speaking with them, you had information that they wanted to
Yes.
really hear.
Yes, and we took with us about 3 feet of documents that we were able to leave them. These are unclassified, unrestricted documents. We have never, in the course of our research, ever used a document that was restricted in any way by either our government or any other. Our view is that what's in the open literature is sufficient enough. We don't need to cross that line, and nor, particularly in this climate, would we consider that a viable approach to solving these issues. Public debate and openness.
Climate means here at the, what do we call us, the eve of yet another major global eruption, huh?
I think so. I think perhaps worse than anything that we've ever seen. What also happened as we sort of went through this period, we began to amass a tremendous amount of data. We connected with lots of scientists. We began to archive that data in an organized way. We have over 4,000 index source documents now, which occupy about maybe 20 file drawers. We also have 80 boxes of unindexed archival material, and then we've inherited a couple of libraries from researchers in this field as well, because we're actively pursuing the issues. Our intention is to continue to do that. But beyond HAARP, what began to emerge was what the military now refers to as a revolution in military affairs. It's where the whole approach to warfare has changed so profoundly that, in their words, they describe it as the same kind of changes that took place when gunpowder, for instance, was introduced to Europe in the Middle Ages, or when atomic weapons were introduced to the world scene in the last century.
Wow.
So when you think about that in the context of warfare, and you're looking around, you're saying, well, where is this revolution? And it's the very thing that we've been writing about. HAARP was sort of our entry into that world. But from that, a lot grew. And as we sort of went through this, we ended up with GLOBE. We ended up speaking there. We were approached by a elderly woman right after that presentation, who was sitting out in the audience as part of the NGOs and non-governmental organizations. And she introduced herself as a representative of the Orthodox Church, which traces her roots to the island of Patmos in the Revelation of John. And she said, you know, what you've disclosed is in fact the apocalypse. And I said, well, you know, some people think so. And she said, well, would you consider coming to a conference where issues are going to be discussed, and this may be a very important place for you to be? And I said, well, send me the information, I'll consider it. And it was a few months later that an invitation arrived, and the invitation actually came from the first patriarch of the Orthodox Church, which, for those that don't know, those were the guys that broke from the Catholics in 1054 AD and sort of got the East, and the Catholics got the West, and they created their own structure. But the first patriarch was, prior to the separation, was next to the Pope in power. In the Orthodox Church, he's the first among equals. He invited us over, along with Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, to attend this conference. And the conference was, interestingly enough, called Religion, Science, and the Environment. It was a closed conference. It involved 400 participants. That we were locked on a ship together for 12 days. One of those participants was Tom Spencer, who was the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee by then. And we began to map out a strategy for how we were going to get this issue into the European Parliament. The others on the ship included the vice presidents of several of the countries in the surrounding area. We were traveling in the Black Sea region. We were flown first into Greece, and then 2 charter jets took us into Trabzon, Turkey, where we met, interestingly enough, a Greek ship in a Turkish port, which does not happen very often. From there, we then traveled Turkey, Georgia, Ukraine, Russia, Bulgaria, Romania, back to Turkey.
12 days.
12 days, and then escorted by a Greek gunship back through the Bosporus back to Greece. But during that time, on the ship, we had Nobel Prize winners in all areas of science. Members of all the major religions were represented. In all of that, what really was being said was that religion and science were all saying the same things, using different words to describe the very same observations. From that, I'm looking on the agenda, and the agenda was pretty lengthy, and nowhere on it was HAARP. And I'm going, why am I here? And I approached the person that had put this program together, Maria Beckett, and I said, why did you invite me? I'm not on this agenda. And she said, you needed to meet these people. You need the time to get to know some of these people because they're going to help you and you're going to help them. I said, okay, good enough. And there's another story, maybe we'll get to it today, maybe we won't, but the end result was Tom and I mapped out a strategy where we agreed that we wouldn't just deal with the HAARP issue. We would get a hearing put together and we would deal both with the HAARP issue and non-lethal weapons as a general category. And this would allow us to introduce the European Parliament to a whole classification of weaponry that they were unfamiliar with, that had come to us in the course of our research, which included things that could influence human behavior, physiology, our health in ways that were quite profound, that would lead to great changes in ways in which wars were fought. So Tom put together, and we were able to speak to the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Subcommittee on Security and Disarmament. And in that presentation, we were able to make clear what these technologies were. And we were supposed to have 15 minutes, and we were supposed to debate NATO. NATO refused to appear. They said that they had no policy on ionospheric modification, the stuff of HAARP, and they had no policy on non-lethal weapons, and therefore they refused the Chairman of Foreign Affairs' request to appear.
Wow.
He then went to the American mission and asked them to present someone, and they refused. Instead of 15 minutes, the night before the hearing, we had a 5-hour private session with the committee and 2 members of the European media to really get into detail so that when we went to the hearing, they would be prepared to ask the questions and solicit the kinds of information they wanted on the public record. We were supposed to have 15 minutes. We had an hour and a half to make our presentation, at the end of which we had made one closing statement, and we had said that within 1 year the ABM treaty would be unilaterally abandoned by the United States using the excuse there is no Soviet Union, therefore there is no treaty, which is exactly what the senior senator from Alaska, Ted Stevens, said when he was on the floor of the Congress calling for the abandonment of that treaty and the advancement of missile defense in Alaska, which is exactly what has happened in the preceding couple of years. At that time, it was the only issue that European parliamentarians took exception to. It was the only issue that we couldn't produce paper beyond the fact of HAARP's existence saying that we were already headed that way. But a year later, less than a year later, in fact, the Federal Register announced this movement to abandonment of the treaty. We were able to send that over, and when the resolutions finally came forward, our sections of the security and disarmament resolutions for all of Europe were voted on by the strongest majorities of any of the subsections because of the coalition we had built and because every single issue we had raised was supported by the facts, and the only speculation that we had raised was proven by the facts less than a year later. Since that time, a great deal has happened. I mean, we've seen the European Parliament Act. We saw the Russian Duma Act.
What's the implication to us as individual citizens?
As individual citizens, there are some specific aspects of HAARP that we really haven't gotten into, and they deal with the ability to manipulate human physiology, our health. One of the things that came up in our research was a document. It was called, it was actually a book, a popular book. It was called Unless Peace Comes, and within that book was a chapter called How to Wreck Your Environment. The book was written in 1969. The guy that wrote that section on how to wreck your environment, remember, this is before Earth Day, the first Earth Day, so environmental issues were dealt with much differently back then. The Earth was something to conquer and manipulate, not something to recognize as sustaining to everything about us. It was looked at much, much differently. But at that time, what he suggested, a guy named J.F. Gordon MacDonald had been a science advisor to Johnson. He was also a geophysicist at UCLA. He had suggested that if we could ever figure out how to electronically stroke the ionosphere in just the right way, we could return a signal to the Earth in the ELF range, the extremely low frequency range, that would manipulate the behavior and health of human beings over very large geographic areas. Now, how would that work? This is what modern science has shown, and really what a lot of our follow-on work has been about, is the idea that you can take external signals, oscillating signals, of various kinds, whether it's flashing light, sound oscillations, which are a little different to manipulate because of the way our hearing works. We don't hear these low frequency sounds so readily, but there's a way to create what's called a bi-aural beat, and this is created by sending in one signal in one ear at, say, 17,000 pulses per second or cycles per second, and one in the other ear at, say, 17,007 pulses per second, which gets you a cancellation effect when they cross, and you get a standing beat frequency of 7, the difference between the two. Now what that is that's a signal right in the middle of one of the most active parts of brain creativity. That's 7 hertz is where you are in an alpha state. This is your most creative state. Interestingly enough, the Earth naturally pulses at what's called Schumann's resonance, something discovered in the mid-50s, which is 7.83 hertz. So wow. The ideal place for human beings is within that range. It's where our most creative work is done. And yet everything around us, the whole power grid that's been created around us, is at 60 cycles or 60 hertz. This is a much higher frequency level. Now, let's break this down into some sort of how the brain might interact with these signals. If you take 1 to, say, 4 hertz, this would be the delta range. This is where people are in their very, very deepest states of sleep. The next range, the theta range, is between approximately a little over 4 hertz to approximately 7 hertz. This is where young children between the ages of 3 and 5 generally spend most of their time. It's where humans as adults spend their time sort of in that dream state when you're not awake, but you're not asleep, but you're fully conscious of your dreaming. That's where these little kids are, which kind of explains a lot. You have a lot of children. I have 5, so it explains a lot for me as to where they're at.
5 children. Didn't you think he was 20, 30? 5 children.
But in this state, this is sort of that in-between state. Then the next state, the alpha state, our creative state, which runs up to about 12 hertz or 12 pulses per second. Then above that is the beta state. The low beta is where we probably are right now as we're actively talking and conversing and thinking. High beta would be when we get agitated or angry or out of control. The higher up it goes.
How high can it reasonably?
Well, I think brain activity bounces around quite a bit, but 60, 70 hertz as a predominant frequency would be pretty rare. Up to 30 would be pretty common as a dominant frequency within the brain.
So sometimes when people can feel my energy, that might just be what's going on.
Absolutely. In fact, there's more and more science that would say that that's true. In fact, as a demonstration of that, I'll show you a little way to demonstrate just some very subtle energy differences on the body that we can actually measure. But let's take it sort of the next step. So now you have different ways to create this external signal. Now, one way would be flashing or flickering light. Now, what could that do to the brain? And we use this illustration in the European Parliament testimony because just a few months before it had been a major news story that in Japan, 700 children watching a cartoon on TV from normal distances had gone into epileptic seizures and were taken to the hospital.
Wow.
And what it wasn't the intensity of the energy coming from the television. It was the flicker rate sustained within what's called a window frequency, a very specific frequency that causes chemical changes in the brain that led to those seizures.
Oh, wow.
So light can create it, sound can create it, electrocranial stimulation can create it. This would be the pulsing of an electric current on a pulsed basis, can actually set up the same kind of thing within the brain. And then externally, things can be used like a pulsed microwave. In other words, sending a microwave signal in. In fact, it wasn't just a couple years ago that we saw the Marines announce this new crowd control weapon that would create the sensation of heat on the surface of the skin. And that's a great effect if you consider burning people a humane way to deal with things. I thought we got rid of that in the Middle Ages, but apparently it's coming back by popular demand by the military. But what they didn't say is that by altering the waveform, the pulse rate, or the signal itself, you create much different effects than heating. You could override brain function in a way that would cause disequilibrium, where you would fall, you would be difficult to stand, you create nausea, similar to flu-like symptoms, or actually interfere with emotional states and brain patterns, creating anger or anxiety.
I think we talked about these. These are real weapons of war that many said were being used in the, I want to say the Gulf War. Gulf War I.
Gulf War I. And in fact, we reported in our second book, Earth Rising, the Revolution, that very thing. We speculated on it. This book is probably, in fact, I do consider it our absolute best work. It has over 650 separate sources that are footnoted within the title. It is a very dense book that analyzes, shortly it analyzes a little bit of updates on HAARP, but mainly it deals with new technologies, weather modification, surveillance technologies, a number of technologies of what the Europeans call technologies of political control. In fact, This time in the islands, it's one of the things that we'll be lecturing on are these very technologies that we've disclosed. But when you look at the idea of influencing human behavior, going back to J.F. Gordon MacDonald, what he said was that if we could stroke that ionosphere, then what happens is this external signal comes in, and this is an interesting part of the human brain. Very, very small energy concentrations are sufficient to override brain function if you hit these window frequencies. It's like dialing through a radio station.
Yeah.
As you dial through, when you get resonance between the transmitter and the receiver, that's when you hear the signal. In between, you get static. The same is true in the human brain.
You know, we're sitting here so calmly. Do you know what he's saying here, guys? Are you catching this? This is saying that with little awareness and at very low power, things can be generated to affect you in dramatic, I want to say life-shattering ways.
Yep.
That are, now this is old news.
Old news. In fact, we have over 3 dozen patents on just this area of technology cited in Earth Rising. And the reason that we cite everything is because when you get into these areas, it becomes pretty unbelievable. And for us as researchers, as scientists, as journalists, as we look at these things, that demands the heavy documentation and footnoting that we do. And when we document these things, it's government records and academic studies.
Didn't you have a friend, I'm not remembering now, see, it's been a while. You had a friend named Patrick.
Right.
Who had a neurophone?
Right. Right.
What happened with that?
That device we actually demonstrated in the European Parliament, and
you know what a neurophone is?
This is essentially an infrasound device. It transfers a sound signal through the skin, coupling with the we think the nervous system, but it could be other energetic systems of the body. In fact, it may very well be other energetic systems of the body. It then sends a sound signal directly into the brain, where you can hear the signal just like you're hearing my voice. The difference is it's the proverbial voice in the head. In this case, it requires a physical contact. What has come forward and what is now showing up in not just the academic literature, but also studies done by the European Parliament, is this same technology has been developed by use of microwaves or at a distance with no physical contact whatsoever. And we cite a number of patents that show how this has evolved. So when you think about it, I mean, one of the things that we're sort of talking about two different issues. On the HAARP side of the equation, you can influence emotional state, but not specific words. It's not designed to do that, at least not as we see it at this point in time. Other systems would need to be utilized for that purpose. But if you look at sort of where the HAARP system goes in influencing general emotional state, if you take the same idea that you can override brain function subtly, and you couple it with what we know from the patent record, there was a Scottish press report that came out after the Gulf War I that said that the most devastating weapon in the Gulf War was a signal that we embedded on the radio broadcast coming into the area. The normal radio broadcasts that were broadcasting the Muslim prayers 5 times a day that everybody was listening to. We put a signal on that generated the emotions of fear and paranoia. And what did we see? We saw the 4th largest army in the world collapse like elementary kids running out on a fire drill. I mean, and they attributed it to the bombardment, the continual bombardment of these bunkers. But let's look at World War II and what happened there. In Dresden and London, bombarded civilian populations, not trained, highly trained military people. Civilian populations sustained bombardment after bombardment, year after year, and didn't give up. What we saw in the Gulf War was the first use of non-lethal weapons since shown to be used, and now we hear a lot more in the public literature and the political literature coming out of Europe that says clearly that this is in fact the case, that this is the direction of modern warfare. The problems are that the development of non-lethal weapon systems are being developed, at least in the United States, on a priority basis with a joint protocol between Department of Defense and Department of Justice to find civilian applications for these very same technologies. Those are what get priority funding.
So when I see all these troops being sent over, is that just a front, if you will, for a higher technology that's going to be used that will really make, that will be the war?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think it's the cleanup crew, actually. I mean, when you think about Afghanistan, what happened there? I mean, we went in, we blew them completely away,
and we walked in,
and then we came in.
dust.
That's right. Because, and when did we fight that war? We fought it at night. And why do we fight at night? Because the array of sensor technology that has evolved in the last 10, 15 years is such that you might as well be in daylight for us. I mean, you can not only differentiate through cloud cover and everything else, but you can differentiate under the ground several hundred feet, and you can determine as little as a half a degree of temperature differential. You can determine vibration, you can determine things that will separate human beings from animals and machines, and then adjust your targeting accordingly.
Are you guys catching this? I think we're going to adopt Dr. Nick here. And we keep him, I think we want to keep him at least another hour. But anyway, I can tell that the type of things that we're talking about, you know, I think of you sort of like a bouillon cube, which is being visited by a bunch of beautiful ladies, and they're all your family.
That's right.
Aloha. You know, you're like a bouillon cube. You know, as you listen, you add a little water, and you're talking about, you know, major things that are, there's so much here. In the time that we've got, I know we want to be covering subjects. We were going to talk about what you're doing now, which is, I think we should really, it's almost like, I hope that you guys are going to check out Dr. Nick's let me have some websites and some phone numbers.
Sure. The website is www.earthpulse.com, and the phone numbers to reach us 888-690-1277. And you know what we've done on the website is there's a compilation of materials. In the last few years, we've tried to publish short essays. We've published for a lot of magazines and publications around the world. We've done a lot of radio, which is sort of the way we've kept people informed as we've gone through these last few years. But the writing has been central because we footnote everything. This is not just useful for scientists. We write for lay people. We write for the average person so that we as citizens can understand these issues. We footnote for the scientists so that those that have that interest can look at that and go dig out those sources and know where this material comes from. And we also footnote for the politician because we encourage people to talk to their local legislators, talk to state legislators, particularly when we talk about privacy issues, which is a big part of our current work. There are things that can be done on a state level that can preempt some of the things that are happening in other quarters, or at least setting perimeters that are acceptable in terms of surveillance and personal privacy. Since September 11th, the world has changed. The things that we predicted in advance of September 11th, we laid out exactly what would happen in Earthrising the Revolution. That was published in January of 2000, far in advance. What has happened when we wrote Earthrising, it was as a warning, as a signal to the scientific community, as a signal to the public that we needed to pay attention to these very many issues that would change the way in which our lives would operate. And we have seen that pace accelerate dramatically since 9/11. Only in recent days has the step back, where you see a peace movement emerging, you see the Civil Liberties Union and others starting to raise these issues now, saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe we've gone too far. We assert that we have gone too far. If the very things that we're supposed to defend against, which is life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, fundamental American values, are breached in the process of defense, then what are we defending? And what have we defended? I think if we lose that, then we've lost the war, no matter how many countries fall, no matter how many people die. That's what makes this country great, are those things. When we talk about 250,000 people being amassed in the Gulf as we tape this today,
yep,
and American lives at risk, this kind of warfare changes the way wars are fought. In other words, American lives aren't in as direct jeopardy as they were in past wars. When our fathers and our grandfathers came back from battle, still with the smell of death in their nostrils, they didn't want their children or grandchildren there. They did it as a last resort, the absolute last step. When technology makes it easy, when technology makes it like a video game run remotely from a ship or a plane, thousands and thousands of feet or perhaps hundreds of miles away from the battlefield, it's a lot easier to execute warfare, to take human life. That's why we need to be even more cognizant of it. Not saying that wars are going to go away in the short term. They're going to be with us at least for our lifetimes, probably our great-grandchildren's lifetimes. But the fact of the matter is constraint and restraint is done when the public demands it and when the public balances the need to destroy life for the need to preserve it. And we need to be cognizant that technology makes it easy, and we need to make sure that the political will to look at these issues doesn't go away along with our civil liberties in the course of all of this.
Very eloquently stated. I'm going to bring it down into, that means all of you out there who recognize, I'm translating, recognize that peace is a good option. Dr. Nick has really documented just how far we've gone with war and how important it is for all of us to get up and say something to try to halt and shape our future policies. Right now we're in the middle of something that I guess we really can't stop. You know, it's beyond us, you and I, to stop it, I believe.
Yeah, and we may be creating the very same circumstances that exist in the Middle East, where we're hated multi-generationally. That changes everything. And this has changed everything. It will not be like the Gulf War of the early 90s. It'll be a much different kind of war. It'll be a war that won't go away quite so easily.
Well, now let's switch a little bit, because I don't want you to forget Earth Rising, the Revolution, the book, or Angels Don't Play This HAARP. Is there another book for them to be running out and getting?
The one that's coming out, in fact, we're just finishing up the work on it. It's Earth Rising Revolution 2. It's dealing with a number of issues. We'll be dealing with the new underwater sonars that have been a big controversy in this part of the world, as well as Alaska, a number of other places.
Whale.
Absolutely, and their impact on marine life, as well as perhaps even human beings in the oceans. The other area that we get into in Earth Rising 2 is cell phones and the whole implications of the wireless world in terms of health, going beyond cell phones to just the whole idea of energy fields that we are surrounding ourselves by. We get into personal privacy, a significant section on updates on HAARP. Surveillance technologies are dealt with at length, really showing sort of the development of the transparent American, transparent human being as our governments become significantly more opaque. And I think this is an important issue, because politics is going to change because of it. I mean, when you we've seen it happen in our lifetimes. It goes from focus groups to polls to spin to manipulation, really. But in a pretty crude way. You can't do it quite so scientifically. What's coming is much different. What's coming is being referred to in the European Parliament and in other places around the world as technologies of political control, because they see ultimately the technology being used to manipulate public opinion in a way that lends itself to whoever's in power. This is important, because when messages can be tailored specifically to individuals, that's highly, highly manipulative, because you can just give enough information to convince somebody that you're right while ignoring all those things that they would object to. And you can do this by profiling, data valence, which is a new word for people that maybe aren't familiar with that. That's the collection of massive amounts of data that's centralized. Now under the Patriot Act, that's being done on a wholesale basis. This is collecting every public record. It's accessing library records for books and checkout of materials. Internet is totally monitored. If you think you're free on the internet, you're not. That system was developed by the military. It's monitored by the military. As technology has improved, where you can crunch more and more data faster and faster, and where that is every 10 months it's doubling. Our capacity is doubling. In fact, technology is doubling every 9 to 10 months. That's technology from the invention of the wheel to where we are today.
You know, there are amazing things, and they happen good ones too.
Absolutely. This is all two-edged.
There's unbelievable things that are happening. I heard about a biophotonic scanner measuring antioxidant levels with a low-power blue laser on your finger.
Right.
I mean, tremendous things. There's so much going on.
There's a we were talking about energy from the body. This is an electroacupuncture device, and acupuncture in the 60s in the U.S. was regarded as hocus pocus. Okay, and it eventually got validity when scientists began to quantify it. And I'll tell you, this is an interesting one because it has two modes. This device picks up signals and sends signals. So, for instance, it'll measure over the surface of the body, and every human being has, unless you have scar tissue, certain areas where their skin resistance is different. This device actually measures it. There's an acupuncture point that sits approximately right there on your index finger.
Soon lateral to the...
And so if you move this across it, you'll get a flashing light and an audio signal, and when you get to it, let me turn the sensitivity down a little bit. Not too far. It'll get more solid, and then I'm going to depress this and send a signal in that's energizing that point. And what will happen when I let go of this is the signal will become clearer and more solid in tone as the energy clears. And what it's essentially doing is it's first measuring and then sending a signal in. Well, every human being has energy radiating from the body, and it can be measured, it can be photographed. If you photograph the body in an electromagnetic field, you can actually pick up photon emissions, light emissions coming from the fingertips, and they actually look like little bolts of lightning if you look at them under what's called Kirlian photography. And there's some different methods of Kirlian photography. There's some that are used in fairs that really is not the Kirlian photography invented in the 30s that actually shows these same kind of emissions. It shows something a little bit different, but it's still measuring this skin difference differentials and giving some analysis of it. The point is, energy as the root of our health is really the root of not just the military science and where it's going in the revolution of military affairs. It's also the heart of where the new science is leading us in terms of the medical profession. In fact, I think what we'll see in the next decade is energy medicine will become mainstream in a way that most of the public and major insurance carriers will accept. And if you think about the human body...
Practitioners are thrilled, I imagine.
Well, you know, think about the human body as energy, and then atoms, and then molecules, and then chemicals and compounds, and then body parts, and then body. And what does Western medicine do? It looks at the outside first, goes in a little bit with some lab tests, maybe a little chemical work, but it doesn't do much more than that. You know, when you think about Eastern medicine, it starts with energy and then works its way outward. Works a little slower. I mean, these types of alternate therapies, they tend to work a little bit slower. You don't get the instant fix of popping a pill and feeling better. But those are usually symptom fixes in Western medicine. Right. Many of the alternate therapies are able now to claim much more than symptom fixes. In fact, in Europe, a good friend of mine developed a method of electro-laser acupuncture that was challenged by their medical authorities. He had to go to their highest court in the country, and he won. He was able to demonstrate with 16,000 cases over his lifetime the effect of using electro-laser systems for acupuncture. These are what are called cold lasers, or class 4 lasers. They're powerful, but they don't burn you. Yeah. And I actually saw one of these demonstrated in Europe, quite effective technology, but he has done some remarkable work in that area, published extensively. By background, he's a physicist. He's also a physiologist, and he also has studied acupuncture and Chinese medicine, among other things. And when you think about sort of the breakthroughs in the science, we talk about a lot of these subjects that we've covered in this brief time today. They're scary on one hand, but on the other hand, once we know their potentials and understand them, we can do some incredible things in terms of healing and health sciences. And I think that's where the education starts, the awareness starts, not on a basis of fear where we've seen the country go, but on the basis of hope, on the basis of compassion, and on the basis of the things that are the higher human values. Because when we think clearly, when we think and we maintain those values, that's where things change in a positive way.
So, what do we say? With anything, you can do good, you can do bad.
That's right.
If we create a world and help shape our world, whether we can use this technology to our greater good, so be it. I think that's something that we all can do, is encouraging your legislators and more than your legislators, anybody, everyone.
Absolutely.
To encouraging this good energy.
Absolutely.
We also have the energy to do it. You know, time is running away, I know, and I want to get Airielle in here because I'm sure she's all excited to want to say something to you. You know, this is your vacation. We appreciate you spending the time with us. This is a real
thank you for covering
blessing for us. And You know, I'm going to be gone. You're going to be gone by the time I get back. But I know you're always welcome. We can
thank you.
do this even from a distance. And it's... Well, here comes Airielle.
I'm just scooting in here.
Hello.
Yeah, I'll give you the mic, Airielle.
I just want
Here,
to
you
say
hold it.
thank you so much for all the work that you've done over the years.
Well, thanks.
I really appreciate it, and I hope you can tell how much work he has done, and we all appreciate you.
Well,
and
thank you.
We need people to do that, and it's not easy.
No, it isn't easy. There's always struggles along the way. There's been a few for us for the last few years, but you know, these are important issues. We intend to continue to put our life energy into this work. We're involved in a lot of things that we consider equally as important, and we believe that over time that those issues will come forward. Change can be made. We've seen it happen in just a short 7 years.
Well, you know, I'm sure God is with you, and my prayers are with you.
Thank
so
you.
thank you
Actually,
very
I think
much.
I remember discussing that the first time. How come you're still walking around? No one's picked you off. I mean, you're bringing up some hot tamales.
Stay with us.
You know, I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think a lot of it is, you know, I come from a political family. I have a lot of good political contacts. You know, and that does give you a little bit of, I think, an edge in the sense that we have friends in high places that can help us along the way. At the same time, we got friends in higher places, I think, that help us a lot further. I think Creator does guide our footsteps, as our tribal chief in Alaska says. You know, the things that make us who we are no different than anyone else watching this today. Anyone watching this today can do what we've done. It only requires an effort. You know, I used to be worried or contemplate as a young kid what faith was. I always thought that it had to be something that was out there. And I determined in later years that it was a very simple thing. Faith is stepping into the thing that you know to be right and true by taking an action. And it could be a very simple action. And the thing I've said to people all over the world is, take 10 minutes, write something down that you're passionate about, that you care about. Put it with those bills that you have to deal with every month, that unpleasant time, and take 10 minutes, that 10 minutes each month, and do something good for the planet. And you'll become part of an organic internet. It's called the human race. And it's the internet that's going to change the way things are. And it starts with each of us taking a step in that direction.
Well, I think we're going to bring him in here and permanently kidnap you.
Well, we hope to be back. I mean, it's, you know,
Good,
this has been
good.
way too long since we've been here.
Yeah.
This is the first vacation I think we've had since the last time I was here. So
No
it's been
kidding.
a long haul the last few years,
Well.
but we expect to be back in the islands again, and hopefully with other messages, some of them more bright than the one that we've delivered
I hope
today.
that some of you here have, by the time you see this tape, have seen Dr. Nick Begich at his local show here and going to be talking. If not, you'll check on the internet, Earth Pulse. We're going to put those things up there. We'll put up email, all the contact numbers you need. It's been a pleasure. I know we're running out of time.
Thank you again, and thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. You know, we don't have enough time for the amount of things we'd like to share. We didn't even get into what is, I consider, even greater social work. But we're going to have him back. There is no question. Thank you all for joining us, and please, cards and letters. Aloha, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
You just did it.
No matter where you go, no matter what you do, take that Maui style with you. Cause if you ain't Maui styling, you just living on an island. Maui styling, don't let me down. 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 There is sunshine in your heart. It's been with you from the start. of countries.